Hello, welcome to the Purple Rock podcast. I am your host this week, Matt. With me is Emma. Not with us is Andy. We locked the doors. There will be no Andy rants about Plan Voodoo. It's just the two of us. You're getting the uncut goodness.
We did this to protect you. You're welcome.
Yeah. No, he threatened. He threatened to be here. And we were like, no, you can't do it. No one wants to hear your thoughts about Plan Voodoo for the 75th time. And he's like, no, but they actually do. That's why they tune in. So
Prove him wrong, people. We want to see your comments. Making fun of Andy and praising us.
right. Don't worry. I'm sure he will be quite active in the comments this week. Um, but we do have 2 episodes of Survivor Cook Islands to talk about as we continue our journey back through this season. And I got a very important question to ask you, Emma. They can just go to the other beach?
Right? Like what the hell was that?
That's the only time this happens,
hippie
right?
invasion. Yeah, as far as like, besides like times where it's certainly the only time it happens like by accident. And
right.
Not production being like, send someone here,
Right. Yeah, no, I definitely got some questions about that. Like, is that a thing that could be done? And I was like, well, I think they took steps to prevent that in the future after this.
Yeah, I got a lot of this doesn't seem fair. And I think that's the thing, is it ultimately is fine because Cowboy rubbed everyone the wrong way. But like in theory, this is a massive advantage for the people who went on this excursion, because like they could have bonded with everyone. And there might be something to say, like Ozzy does seem to end up having like a friendship with Nate. Who knows when that really began? Probably later in this episode when they kidnap him, in this podcast episode, not this TV episode, but in our little batch. But yeah, it's like completely wild that they just let this play out, because this potentially could have been incredibly unfair.
When do you think production realized that they were going to wind up on the, what is that, the Raro Island?
Raro, yeah. I mean, one would assume the camera operators know which islands are which, so when they're like along there, I would think, but maybe not until they were, if I don't know how they really divvy up those like production and stuff. So
right. Yeah, like I don't know if the production crew that is on the Aitu beach are talking to the people over on Raro and telling them like, oh, hey, you got incoming, or if they're like, oh, they're just canoeing out there, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh crap, we got to do something about this. Or maybe they thought like, hey, this is great TV.
Yeah, I mean, even the idea of just going to a different island is a pretty foreign concept. Again, outside of being sent there like an exile and stuff like that. But if people just being like, we feel like we don't have any resources here, so we're just gonna go to a different beach.
Yeah, and I feel that's actually something that in Modern Survivor they're told they can't do. Because I know they've talked about the fact that like their beaches have been, have been foraged out over time or whatever, and that's, if that's true, then why wouldn't you go further afield for food? And the answer might be because they're not allowed to. So
yeah, it also makes me wonder how often tribes really are on separate islands versus different beaches on a larger island. And obviously, that's just going to depend on the terrain.
Yeah, no, I know there was one setting they used for a while. It may have been the Philippines, but I'm not sure. But I know for a fact they weren't different islands. They were different beaches on like the same like shoreline or the same island or whatever. Like, and they were like, okay, like, you can't go past here or whatever. Because I remember them talking about that.
And obviously that would be the case on any mainland season.
Right. Yeah. Of course, like in like Africa, they weren't allowed to go anywhere because they would have died. So,
yeah, don't go anywhere because you might see other cast members. Don't go anywhere because a lion might eat you. We all have our problems.
Yes. But, I kind of like the beginning of that segment where, well, actually, I want to talk about the end before I talk about the beginning, which is one funny thing about that segment was, so Cowboy gets there and he's talking and he's doing the cowboy. And I just love the way the editors do the time passes thing. The person I'm watching with also found that very funny. She was like, "How long do you think this is going?" I'm like, "I don't know, but they want you to think this is going for a very long time."
Yeah, it's a tool the editors like to use, and it works every time.
Yep. Yeah. And of course, there's this kind of classic cowboy where he's just
Right.
talking, and he's pissing everyone off.
And not reading the room.
No, not in the slightest.
And just being like, hey, can we just take some of your food?
Yeah.
Like the one time I will, not hate Adam. Is just like, no.
Yeah. Though he was getting kind of super aggro about it.
Oh, for sure. I mean, he's still most
Adam.
punchable.
Still Adam.
But he had a point.
No, he totally had a point. Yeah.
You can't do that. It'd be one thing again, them I mean, why ask? Just on your way back out, like you guys were doing when you first landed there, just take stuff.
Probably because they figured they would follow them out or whatever.
That's fair. The thing that's just, it's so strange is that they get on they're I can buy all that, but once they show up, the fact that it's not oh wow, whoa, we didn't know this was your island, and then they leave.
Yeah.
But that doesn't happen. They just stay and talk, and I feel maybe I'm sure they didn't show it, but I feel it's so wild that they don't even say as they're walking oh wow, we were just exploring and happy. All Raro knows this is some sort of twist, and they're about to send 3 people.
I think they definitely thought it was a twist at first.
It would make sense.
Yeah.
I loved I think it was Parvati, but I'm not positive because it was subtitled, so it's hard to say, but someone was oh, and it's the 3 we can't stand.
Yeah, I think that may have actually been Jenny, but
it could have been Jenny.
Sure.
It was definitely they were sitting together. It's definitely one of the 2.
Yeah, because Jenny and Brad definitely did not like cowboys, so it was
true.
Yeah,
but I'm sure maybe Parvati didn't like Flicka.
That is true. That is true.
We know Christina wasn't an Aussie fan. Oscar was not an Oscar fan.
Right. So the 3 of them seem really close after last week when Cowboy and Flicka voted against Ozzy, and and so how the hell did that happen all of a sudden?
I mean, I imagine a decent amount of it is where else is Ozzy gonna go?
Right.
At that point. And I mean, they're just they're the hippies of the group, and Ozzy, I guess, just kind of had to get over it, which is an unusual thing for us to see Ozzy do. But who else was he gonna talk to? You know? So
yeah, and
I think it's as simple as that.
Right. And so the 3 of them, they already seem close by the beginning of this episode, and when they go out to explore, they invite Sundra with them. And Sundra's oh, I don't think I'm up for that. And then we find out in confessional, she's like, I just don't want to hear them begging me for 2 hours about joining their alliance, because she knows that the numbers aren't there. It doesn't make sense. And so, of course, they leave. And what does Sundra do?
Get asked to join a different alliance.
But this one where the numbers are there. So... And
I think, oh, sorry.
No, you finish. No, you go.
I was just gonna say, and I think, Yule, Jonathan are probably oh, this is a rational person we could work with. That's intriguing.
Yes.
Instead of tying everything to people who happened to be on our original tribe, we could just have someone we actually mesh with and work with her.
Yeah, and I guess that's the thing, how, I don't want to jump all the way ahead, but obviously, at the end of these 2 episodes, Cowboy gets voted out. And so I just kind of wonder, they were kind of already planning something along those lines at the beginning of this first episode, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine... It's interesting because I would imagine he wasn't necessarily there first choice, but he wasn't going to be their third either, because like
Yep.
you was even saying, they did kind of need, they do kind of need to have Ozzy around for
Hmm.
a while. But as Penner says, you don't want him at the merge,
No, but we're
but they
still not
like
that close to the
eating, so
merge.
yeah,
Yeah, we're still
exactly.
not
They're
that
far
close to the
enough.
merge. No,
No.
I mean, and the fact that they're talking about like, oh yeah, a strong five is like, well, who's not in the five? Those three. And so it's just kind of interesting how soon they are ready to move on from Flicka and Cowboy the second their usefulness is done, which, is after the one vote they needed them for.
Yeah, I do wonder. I mean, I think especially for Flicka, but if they had responded to various votes and such differently, if they maybe would have been more on board on like sticking with their six, and
Yeah.
getting rid of Ozzy and Sundra. But it's also again like with that smaller try, do you really want that as a six and then you're four? Do you want to try to keep those other people around? So
Yeah. Yeah. Um, but Sundra, she seems perfectly happy to join with that alliance, right? She doesn't seem to have any hesitations.
yeah, I mean, as she said, she was swapped onto this tribe with nobody else she knew already. I imagine she kind of voted Becky because that's just what she had heard. It didn't seem like
Yeah.
she was really with that crew, because she probably would have been a little more down to try to stick with them and like bring in others or something. It's just like, okay, they're not gonna hold a grudge against the fact that I voted against them. Like, cool, that works. I'll
Yep.
just They seem fine. And I mean, it's honestly, it's a great spot for her because you have Jonathan and Candace and Yul and Becky. And I don't know if they know at this point that it's a final three and not a final two. But either way, when you get to final five, someone's, they're going to
Yeah.
need one of you.
Right.
So
Yeah, and then
there's, it's
yeah,
a good
don't
spot.
do much more. It's yeah, as you said, you're in a good spot there. So, um, yeah, and then we I'm sorry. Um, right. And so then, oh my God.
See, and now
So,
you know where the lyrics came from.
yes. Um, but yeah, so look, so Raro wins their only challenge, I think, of these two episodes when they win a reward challenge, right? And then,
Right.
they,
And this is the one that's very, I mean, there are others that are like definitely strength based, but this is like
oh yeah,
pure. They like Adam and Nate have, how much weight against like,
yeah,
is it Yule and Penner who are paired together?
yeah.
So
It's
what do you
basic.
do with them?
Yeah, it's basically the modified version of the Pearl Island support the weight on your back challenge,
Mm-hmm.
but you're doing it with two people and you can't hold it across your back. So you're going to be able to hold a lot less weight. But it's the same type of strategy, the same type of challenge. And it just definitely favors the tribe with bigger people. Like just everyone on that tribe is bigger, they're going to be able to do this better. And so they decide to send Penner back to Exile Island, which is why I was bringing this up.
Mm-hmm.
This is the right strategy, right? We see this in future seasons. You send back people who've already been to Exile Island so that you know where the idol will be, right?
Right. And, we see the fact that this happens kind of leads to some of Cowboy's thoughts for Plan Voodoo as well. It's just there are at this point only 4 options where the idol
Yep.
could be. 3 of them are on his tribe. He has his, unfortunately for him, incorrect suspicions on who that might be.
Yeah. Yeah. So
But,
should we
the
talk
odds were
about Plan
decent.
Voodoo now, or should we wait a bit?
Probably wait.
Oh,
Probably
okay.
wait.
So right. So we'll wait. So the one other thing that was kind of odd before we get to the end of this first episode was Penner comes back and he basically tells everyone someone has the idol. Did you think that was a little weird when he did that?
I mean, there's a thing. Well, I would say normally there's the thing where you don't really want people to think you'll have it, because now people know to flesh it out. And also it wasn't, but this is the God idol, and until a little later. No one comes up with a plan. So, that kind of idol you maybe want everyone to think you have because they'll be afraid to vote for you.
But if you want people to think you have it, do you want to come back and be like, I don't have it, but someone does?
Yeah. I mean, that's obvious, maybe he wants to figure it out and is hoping to find, but he's got to really, like, I think the move is probably to talk to Candace one-on-one because she's also been there. And, see if you can kind of gauge it with her. And then if you want to try to talk to Yule, because at this point he is working with Yule, and Yule has shown a willingness to tell people he has the idol when he trusts them, that there could be value there. And then if he doesn't, and if he believes both of them, then they know Adam has it, So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I thought that was a little odd, but it was also kind of very characteristic of Penner to kind of just, say stuff out loud and think you're being sneaky, and then everyone is like, oh, Jonathan must have this. Obviously, he's very untrustworthy.
Sorry, I was just gonna say it's also very early in the existence of idols too.
That's true.
So to give a little bit of grace,
there is no playbook here,
right? But one's about to be invented.
Yeah. So one more thing before we get there.
Yes, we should finish episode 5 first.
Sure. We'll be done in like 2 more minutes. There's very little to talk about here.
It's a basic episode.
But basically, right. So Aitu wins. Raro loses. They go to tribal, and once again, when Raro loses, they come back, and Stephannie is like, "Can't wait till I get home." And everyone's like, okay. So did Stephannie actually want to be there?
It's really tricky because, I mean, you have her. I think maybe she was ready, but didn't want to say as much and be viewed that way, because both times this happened, she then goes and tells, one of the girls, in this case, it was Parvati, is like, no, what? Oh my God, I can't believe they turned it that way. Right. But I'm just, the fact that Nate twice is the person who receives this information and seems to be I like Stephannie and I want to keep working with her. He seems to have that motivation, but is consistently convinced that she doesn't want to be there. Makes me wonder, kind of what's being said, or, maybe how he's reading between the lines in a way we're maybe not quite absorbing, because I think the weekly thing initially where they end up voting JP, I think you can see that as just kind of a feeling defeated, feeling bad, you feel like you screwed up, okay, but then that being oh, it's between Christina and who else, oh yeah, it'll probably, it's probably either her or me, and hey, if I have to get some mashed potatoes, not the worst thing in the world. So I could also see her really just being I'm trying to make peace with the fact that I can't control it at this point, but twice.
Yeah, it's just, but the thing is, she knows that this is why she almost went home last time, and then she does it again. So it's even if she did want to be there, it's a really weird mistake to make twice.
Yeah, it's just that she then always is what? No, oh no, I do want to be there. To other people, right. Is it second guessing? Is it just not wanting to say yeah, I want to quit? Because who wants to be that person? And so if it's oh, I made a mistake in saying this and they misinterpreted it, and now I get to eat at Ponderosa and go on the pre-jury trip, which is probably to a cool place, wherever they're, the South Pacific. I bet it's rad. Yeah, I could definitely see, or maybe it's if I stay, I'm not gonna quit, but right. I'm tired,
And the thing was, they seemed very ready to get rid of Christina. If Stephannie doesn't step in front of that bullet, I'm pretty confident Christina's going home.
First of all, too soon, Christina was shot.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, no, she says it in an episode.
Okay.
To Ozzy. Anyway, it's she's obviously, it's not after the show, so it's not
No, that's okay. Yeah, okay.
But I'm sorry. I did wonder when they're doing that challenge. I was like, God, I hope she's not having to hold it up with the arm that got shot because that would be a huge disadvantage. But I'm pretty sure she had the other one.
Got it.
Feel bad for the people. I hope anyone who is left-handed like said straight up like, "Hey, I'm left-handed," because some of the people had to.
Yeah.
Like, am I picturing that right? I have a hard time with orientation, so I might have that right. But half the people had to do it with their left hands, right?
So we did see some people that kind of twisted around. So I think I think sometimes you did have like a right and a right if they were like kind of twisted a bit. But yeah, I think most people were kind of one and one.
Right. Well, I think they had that, and like Nate pulled across, and Nate and Adam were kind of like bear hugged, which worked.
Oh yeah, no, that was actually really smart because it allowed them to kind of support each other.
I will say, as much as Austin, totally failed in their version of that challenge in Pearl Island. I mean, he actually did fine, but not compared to like Savage or Krista. Like Adam and Nate,
they did pretty well.
They did what they were supposed to. They did a good job. Anyway, welcome to Challenge Talk, where all we care about in Survivor are the challenges.
But yeah, so Stephannie goes home. She kind of. I don't know if she really wanted to or not, but the same mistake twice. I understand why they voted her out here.
Yeah. Although part of me, when, Nate's talking about like, oh, well, if she doesn't want to be there, I'm just like, well, then she's not going to beat you.
Right. Exactly. It's not the worst thing in the world. But the problem there is that Raro's not exactly winning a bunch, are they?
No, which is definitely not how they saw this going. I mean, even losing JP, they seem like they should have more power.
Yeah. Instead, they kind of get their clock cleaned a couple immunity challenges in a row, and the only reason why Aitu doesn't have a big revenge is because the second time,
they both go.
Right, they both go.
And they still lose that challenge.
Right, so that's what I'm saying. Right, they lost that, and they lost it pretty convincingly.
And I did have a question about that challenge. Were Candace and Sundra really good, or were Parvati and Jenny just really bad?
I think Candace was really good.
And that
I think by the time
enough.
they got to, I think after Candace, Parvati and Jenny were just tired out because Candace really fought hard, which was funny because the person I'm watching with was like, I had no opinions of Candace before, but honestly, kind of a badass there. And I was like, I'm not disagreeing with you. I mean, she fought like hell there.
She did a great job.
Yeah. But yeah, so they lose this challenge. I'm actually really not a big fan of this challenge. It seems like a good challenge to get a lot of people hurt.
And I believe it did in Heroes vs. Villains.
Yep.
Poor Ozzy did not stand a chance.
No, that is not the one where you
honestly, he should have just gone limp. I mean, I guess because it really mattered. Like, it wasn't just like a 2 out of 3 thing. The timing really did matter. Yeah. But I mean, combined, those guys probably had like 200 pounds on him.
Oh yeah, no, it's not. Yeah, no.
Like, Ozzy is a great athlete, but when it comes to like,
they can just pick him up and carry him.
Right. Yeah.
So,
I'm surprised they didn't.
Yeah. But yeah, so we get the double tribal, and so now we can talk about what everyone wants to talk about. It is
Plan Voodoo, baby.
Plan Voodoo time. Obviously, the most influential moment in Survivor history. I think everyone can agree on that.
Top 40 for sure.
Right. There is no one here to dispute that.
No. I think it also ties into what we were saying about Cowboy last week, is that his methods might be unconventional, perhaps weird to the untrained eye, but the idea, they're effective. Now, obviously, this did not ultimately work, but it's due to the circumstances. It could have worked if it really had been Jonathan who had the idol, but that was not the case.
This is something I kind of want to bring up. It would not have worked the way he thought it would. So, because when he describes it, he says there will be an idol played. Because he thinks, if you tie the vote, then the idol has to come out. But that's not the point the idol comes out, right? The idol comes out before you go home. I guess it's a little unclear.
True. We don't necessarily know. I mean, I wonder if, because nowadays, with the current idol, if it's tied and you hadn't already played it, you don't get to play it for that second round. So it's possible that's the case for this one as well. We just don't really know because we've never seen it used.
Jeff describes it is if you have the most votes, you can produce the idol at that time. So now if you're tied, they would go to a revote.
Yes. So they would go to a revote though. And at that point, because it's a tie between Jonathan and Candace, the only options of who to vote for are Jonathan and Jonathan and Candace cannot vote. Therefore, you don't have the issue of Penner and or Candace deciding who goes home. So it would be one of them or the other, and the idol would be played. And then, like, say Penner has it.
Well, no, what I'm saying is if it only gets played after the revote, then everyone else has to, if one of them doesn't get more votes, then it's another tie, and then you draw rocks, right?
Sure, but,
So then one of them has to have it. So then let's say that they put all the votes on Candace, right? On the revote. And then Candace doesn't play the idol. They assume that Jonathan has it, but he wouldn't have had to show it in that case.
Yeah, well, we don't know. I mean, they know it would be a tie, right? Because that's the whole plan. So we don't know because it did not go into effect how much they really did talk about it. So maybe they don't all go vote Candace, maybe, and especially they mostly think Jonathan has it.
Right.
So, 4 people, they have their J's and their C's. Maybe they have like a secondary. Right. Okay, 4 people vote Candace. 4 people vote Jonathan, 2 people vote Candace.
I mean, they also might not have thought, they also, might not have known what the tiebreakers were because at this point in Survivor history, these types of ties and revotes and everything are pretty rare. There are my point is not to criticize the plan. My point is to point out that we know more about how tiebreakers work than Cowboy does at this time. So his whole thing about if we tie the vote, one of them has to show it might not have actually been true. But let's assume that it is true that, they could have shown it after the tie. It's really clever. It's the way that everyone has dealt with, hidden immunity idols ever since this moment. It's you get a hidden immunity idol and you split the vote. And that way, if someone does play it, you still send home someone that you want to send home, so everything's okay. And so it is clever that he's the first one to have come up with it, at least on screen. And
definitely. And it was funny because his whole thing is like this dream and playing on like different cards. So when he first starts talking, the person I'm watching with is just like, what? Like, what does that mean? It's like, no, you actually have to pay attention to this. It's just like, why?
Yeah, no, it was kind of similar for the person I was watching too. And I kind of had to explain like why he was saying this would accomplish and whether it would accomplish what he said it would accomplish. And I was like, oh yeah, no, so this is what he's saying would happen. And it's like, oh yeah, I mean, like they haven't really seen immunity idols before, so they don't really get like why, again, this becomes a lot more common over time. So you never really think about it. The first time you kind of come across it, especially because it doesn't work, you don't really think about like, you're not really like analyzing, like, does this make entire sense? You're just kind of like, Cowboy's a weird dude. What's this plan?
Yeah. And, aside from the ties and stuff, the biggest problem with Plan Voodoo is he unfortunately tells it to Yule, who in fact is the one who has the idol. And so, some of it, like it's presented as if Yule's deciding whether he wants to work with Cowboy or whether, he doesn't trust Jonathan anymore. But it's like, he has to vote Yule out. I mean, he is Yule. He has to vote Cowboy out here, right? Because say they go along with Plan Voodoo, and it's a plan, and neither of them have an idol. So even after, and none of it gets played, then, I mean, sure, there's the issue you were bringing up with maybe they vote in such a way that it wouldn't have had to be presented anyway. But regardless, in their mind, it's like, oh, well, then Jonathan or Candace don't have it, so it has to be Adam or Yule.
Right. Yeah. And then and that's not good for Yule.
It's not great.
No. No, I mean I agree. I think Yule's confessional when he talks about Cowboy's plan is one of my favorite Yule confessionals ever. He is like, so Cowboy said this, which he wants us to do this. And he said it was because of this. I have to admit that's really clever. And he's like, he's like, he's really weird, but this works. This is really clever. I hadn't thought of this. I have to do something about this. It's kind of like what's going on. You could see like the wheels in Yule's head turning as he's like, I got to nip this in the bud now.
It's the strategic version of Brad going, look, my head doesn't hurt anymore.
Yeah.
He's like, I've got this red mark on my forehead and that's annoying. My head doesn't hurt. He's like, yeah, he's going off on this weird plan, but it makes sense and I have the idol, so he has to go.
Right. And now the thing about it, if I were Yule, I would be worried, that one, what does what do the other people I'm working with think about the fact that like, we're not going along with this plan? And two, do they recognize that this plan's actually really clever and a good way to flush the idol?
Right. Because then even if they get rid of Cowboy, that's something they can keep in their back pocket later. Right. Also, if the dream was about credit cards, why is it called Plan Voodoo?
It is the weirdest. I mean, like his description of the dream, it makes absolutely no sense. It is the weirdest thing ever. It is just like so perfectly him. Like it is. Yeah. It's. I honestly, I remember the dream making more sense than it does. And then he describes it. I'm like, oh no, this is even more nonsensical than I thought it was.
I'm a little jealous though. I'd rather dream of emergent survivor strategy. I usually just dream about getting murdered.
Well, that's
really stressful.
That's not good.
Yeah, I have a lot of nightmares about people trying to kill me. It's weird.
That is weird.
Once it was Pierce Brosnan.
Oh, well, no, that makes sense. Yeah. I assume you had either just watched Hot Fuzz. Well, the thing is, that's Timothy Dalton, so that would have been weird.
Here's the thing. I've never seen a Pierce Brosnan James Bond movie. I've only seen Pierce Brosnan in Mrs. Doubtfire and Mamma Mia, so explain that one.
No, he has a lot of like murdery energy in both of those, actually. So.
You've never seen Mamma Mia, you liar. Anyway,
I've seen the commercial advertisements, and I stand by my. He has a lot of murdery energy.
How did Meryl really die between movies? Anyway, this is an unnecessary tangent. Sorry, guys. I can tell you more about my nightmares in the comments if you want to know, but you don't, I'm sure.
I don't think you do. Anything else about Plan Voodoo?
How did they get Ozzy to vote out Cowboy?
That might have just been hey, Ozzy, this is what's happening. You're either with us or you're not.
But who bothered?
Yeah, who would have gone to
telling
Ozzy?
Him because they didn't tell Flicka,
Well,
I guess it's sort of like the Adam thing with JP, but
yeah, I kind of wonder
who's talking to Ozzy besides those two. Sorry,
I wonder how close Sundra is with Ozzy because that's the one that might have the bond there.
That could be. That's a good call. I mean, they certainly end up feeling paired together by default, but even before then, she could be like, this is the most sane person in that initial voting block. So
also the person we want to hang on to the most.
Right. Like
because once they get rid of Cowboy, it's like, yeah, we really gotta get rid of
Yeah, so like let's keep him feeling like he's in the loop so we keep eating well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's the first tribal and the double tribal. Cowboy goes home. R.I.P. Cowboy. What'd you think of him this time around?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's like different than I've thought of him before, but I think there's maybe a little more of just, I've said it a lot, but that his methods of various things, whether it's fire making, headache cures, or voting, might seem unconventional, but but they ultimately seem to be effective. And I think that's probably how his life is.
I think Cowboy is one of those people on Survivor who I would absolutely hate to interact with in real life,
Yes.
but I do enjoy watching. He is a kind of weird that isn't like harmful to other people on the island.
Mhm.
He's annoying, which is great because then they give good confessionals about like, oh my god, this person's really annoying. Annoying is good in my opinion.
And something I like about, and as someone who tends to not be as into the sort of wacky characters as other people are,
Right.
like I famously hate Coach and Tocantins, which is when
Right.
a lot of people think he's at his best, is, yeah, sure, we have Cowboy kind of complaining about thinking some of the women are being lazy, but he works hard himself. You know, he's never, and he's even self-aware about how he's perceived. So I like, he's not really sanctimonious, even when he is complaining about other people. And he's self-aware. He's not really hypocritical from what we've seen. He's just different than the rest of them. And that is fine in terms of wacky. What I hate is when you have someone talking about how, oh, they are a word, they play it with honor, and they definitely didn't lie on this vote. They just did actually lie on, and Sierra's the real devil. And, you know, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it's that's it. You know, it's someone who can like it's sort of the same energy, even though it's a very different sort of thing, as someone who like can dish it and can't take it versus someone who dishes it like crazy but also will completely take it and like is good humored about it.
I think that he is self-aware enough to know that he grates on people.
Yeah, he even says in tribal council, you know, in his real life, he's either hated or he's loved, and he understands that, and he's not like trying to be like, and the people who hate me are wrong. He's just like, I'm not for everyone.
Right.
I can respect that.
Right. And Penner was like, he was nodding along. He was
and
like,
he
hell
not
yeah.
For me.
He's talking about me. They actually, like, obviously they didn't get along, but they seem to actually have like a good kind of like, maybe not so friendly, like repartee between the two of them. Like it was obvious that they both like kind of clash, but whenever it's shown on camera, it's kind of amusing. Like it never seems like vicious.
Yeah, like I don't think there's any actual malice between the two of them. For one, like from what we know, like Penner's just not that type of guy. But they're just, you know, they're just not people. They're not the same type of people. They're not people, you know, who get along. I personally am someone who struggles with people who are like a lot, as you know, some people will say, and that doesn't mean those people are bad people. You know, it's just like not someone I can vibe with, and I'm sure that's probably where he was at.
Right, and that's why Andy's not on this episode. So Cowboy goes, and then Aitu gets to eat a nice meal. Raro comes in to vote someone out. It's really obvious who Raro is going to vote out. Like I don't think.
Yeah, like they hate Christina. She asked for like a second chance, but there's no talk of who else they would even vote. I mean, a little bit of like, or do we trust Jenny? Again, another example of the bad thing about this theme is because normally it would not be crazy to be like, oh, I think Jenny might still be tight with people from her original tribe. What you instead hear is, I don't know, Jenny might work with the Asians. Like, Nate, stop.
Never, every time you hear it, you always cringe a little bit.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, and I was like, little do you know, on their tribe, there was all this talk about like, well, Becky and you are Korean and I'm Filipino, and that's different, you know.
Right. And then meanwhile, everyone else is talking about the whites getting back together, you know.
Right. Like, hello. Like, honestly, that was the one thing with Cowboy when he's just like, oh yeah, the white alliance. I was like, yes, drag them.
Yes.
Like, naked, go for it. I did have to point out, I was like, yeah, you'll notice the white people, only ones who haven't been voted out at this point. And he was like, I was like, and all you have left is us. Sorry.
Yeah. Ooh. Yeah, that tribe.
But, you know,
not fair as well.
In the end, it'll even out. But
yeah.
So basically, I think we can kind of yada yada them voting out Christina, but
except for one thing.
Okay.
they did have, there was a chance that it could not be
Well, I was
Christina
going
right
to
at
say,
the
but there
end.
are things from that tribal council that I find interesting we can talk about, which I think is what I'm just saying purely the decision to vote out.
Yes, the decision, but the thing was, because they weren't hiding this, before they
I was
actually
shocked.
what?
I was like, again, sort of like where I was like, how does Becky not get voted out here? I was like, how did they, especially because I had watched Palau recently where they
You
do
mean
this
Jenny, but yeah.
twist.
Right,
And
yeah.
they save Ibrahim because it's so clear that they're like, oh, Ibrahim did bad in one singular challenge. I'm so dumb. But and then like so we're probably gonna vote him out like that. I mean, it's a weird plurality, but the Karor tribe chooses to save Ibrahim,
Mm-hmm.
and that was just immunity. In this case, they have the chance to kidnap someone, and they know that none of them like Christina, and they take Nate.
So there's a couple explanations there. So one, no, because you're right. Like if they wanted to just cause a lot of chaos in this tribe, they steal Christina and then they just like watch the fallout in Glee as everyone scrambles to basically be like, I don't know who to vote out, all that. And then maybe, if Christina
at a time
somehow
when they
keeps
don't think they
surviving.
can stand up too.
What?
Sorry, I was just at a time where they don't think they can stand up and whisper too.
Right. And then if Christina keeps surviving, maybe she allies with you later because she's really thankful.
Yeah.
But here's the problem. I don't think they like Christina either.
Yeah, that's the thing is, unlike in Palau where they just gave immunity, they have to then live with that person for a while.
That's right. And
Ozzy's
already lived with Christina. And I don't think his opinion of her was all that high. And he might have been like, no, you don't want to spend a couple days with her.
I imagine when they're huddled like, no, guys, she's a fucking cop. ACAB, guys. We can't do it.
Ozzy's just like, ACAB. So instead they kidnap Nate. Why do you think they chose Nate of everyone there?
I think they probably find him relatively likable. Maybe they've seen Pearl Islands and remember when Rupert had to take part in the reward challenge with Morgan, and they think maybe Nate will be with them for that. Because he's decent at challenges.
They did say that whoever they kidnap will participate in the reward challenge with them.
Yeah, maybe they just had to find a compromise so Candace wouldn't bring Adam over because Candace kept making like kissy faces and blowing kisses at him, and I hate it so much.
So much.
His face, stupid, smirking, punchable face.
Oh man,
the bad face.
Or maybe they just took pity because Nate was the one who really wanted the food.
That's true. Maybe they thought, and again, maybe they thought that he'll remember that, and emerge and something. Because man, did Nate not hide that he wanted that lamb?
So. Yes. So one thing that I've noticed on rewatch, and I vaguely remembered this from before, is I actually really like Nate. Like Nate is a really engaging presence. I find him to be pretty funny most of the time. I don't think he's like poor strategically. Like I think he gets the game when he's talking about like JP and the safest place for him is like, no, I want JP here because then people aren't paying attention to me. I can get rid of JP later. He seems like he's well liked by pretty much everyone. Like, I definitely enjoy Nate as a presence on this season, but his reactions to the food, they're so fun. Like they're just great. They're just like someone that's just like, this is what I want right now. This is all I'm thinking about. Jeff's like, hey Nate, you with us? He's like, no, I'm not with you. I'm over there.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Adam is just like, I don't really like lamb, so it's fine. Yeah. Which I mean, same.
I mean, Nate's the choice if you want to like weaken the other tribe for the challenge, but you also want to pick someone who you get along with.
Yeah.
So because that's not Adam. It could have been Brad, but I think other people might be a little concerned about the Asians getting together, as it were.
Yeah, that same issue. Whereas that's the other thing too. Nate only has Sundra on that tribe. They've just brought in Sundra, so they're not really worried about her. the way they might about Ozzy, except again, it's not like Ozzy and Christina are gonna like team up.
Though it was funny when everyone huddled up that like Candace did not huddle up. Candace was still making kissy faces at Adam the entire time.
Oh, Adam. You're not nearly as handsome as my husband. That'll mean like so much more punchable.
Yeah. So yeah, let's, at this point we usually check in on the returning players.
Yeah.
But I guess before we do that, I'm just curious, has your opinion, or like what are you thinking of just like some of the people that we don't normally talk about at this point in the season?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people who aren't who aren't Cook Islands fans, talk about like the pre-merge characters not being particularly interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and this is something I can get into more in another section, but I think at this point, like Jenny and Rebecca, and I mean, we know why, really don't get a lot going on. There really isn't a sense of them. My husband's watching with me, and he just constantly, I'll be like, oh yeah, Jenny did this, and he's like, which one's Jenny? I have to be like, oh, it's a freckle, orchard, and like still doesn't do it, and I'm like, the Asian one who's not Becky. He's like, oh right, like he knows who Becky is,
right?
And like Rebecca, I mean, that a complete loss there, is just no sense of her at all.
But I agree. I mean, frankly, like I feel like I have a better sense of Jenny at this point than I do of Sundra, which because this is the first time I feel like Sundra's talked. But yeah, no, it's
we'll have a chance to know Sundra better. We're not going to really get that with
not with Jenny. And the people we lost this episode, Stephannie was not much of a presence, honestly. Like her first episode was probably her best. Christina, like defined by being a cop. Cowboy was a big character. Cowboy is like the first like big character, that we lose. I mean, like Billy is, everyone remembers him because he has the one moment, but like, but Cowboy's like the first kind of like big character we lose.
Yeah, and JP's at least something. Like people remember who JP is. Man, Billy, I can still just like refer to that, and I was like, oh, Billy, why? Why? He's just so shook by that. It's so funny.
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
Deeply funny.
But yeah, and so instead, we're kind, one of the things we're kind of like separating out the show isn't paying as much attention to these pre-merge boots, which if we were watching week to week right now, probably a lot of people would be complaining about. But I actually think it's still pretty entertaining to this point. Maybe not the first episode of these two. That was a pretty dull one.
Yeah, and like I mean, you're just kind of always gonna get that, I think, in most seasons.
I think so.
At some point, but honestly, even that, and rewatching it, like, yeah, it wasn't like particularly exciting, but I also wasn't like bored. Like I wasn't like, agree. This is unpleasant.
I don't think there's been an episode so far this season that has hit the lows of like the worst like Pearl Islands episode. And Pearl Islands is a season that I think is fantastic. But there's a few episodes in that season that are pretty bad or pretty boring.
Yeah, now, it is possible that the fact that we're doing these, 2 at a time for now certainly is helping with that.
Yes.
Because, Lord, I don't know how we would do a whole episode on the Stephannie boot.
Yeah, it would only last a half hour, and we would have been done a while ago.
So there's that at least.
Yeah. So... so let's check in on the returning players. Let's start from the top. Yule continues to be awesome, correct?
We'll always love Yule, yes.
I mean, but this is actually like a really important episode.
It is. I mean, this is, similarly with the Cecilia vote, which is like another one of those plays where someone thinks like, oh, but, she hardly mattered and blah, blah, blah. But that vote is vital because if it's Becky instead, that changes the entire season.
Right, and if doesn't flip this on Cowboy, he's got someone who knows like how to defuse his greatest asset in the game.
And then even aside from his own gameplay, if you're then losing Penn or Candace, I mean that vastly changes the game.
Yeah, especially if you're losing Penner.
Yeah, because Candace, she's flipping anyway.
Right, exactly. You ain't working with her.
Whereas
but Penner, yeah.
Penner, probably just wouldn't have mutinied, and then you're fine.
Well,
but...
because he was gone.
No, I mean, like, if they got rid of Candace.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's true.
But then maybe there's not a bottle twist. Like a lot of things could change.
A lot of things could change in this season if Plan Voodoo does go into effect there.
Yeah.
And then and so Penner, did Yule tell Penner what was going on with the vote split? Do you think?
I don't know. I mean, he might not have needed to, like, especially because Cowboy, is one of those three who are outside. Penner clearly doesn't really like him anyway. It's just like, hey, do you want to do Cowboy tonight? Yeah, sounds good. Okay, cool.
Right.
Tell the group, and then especially because, like, he can probably be like, look, Yule, am voting out the person from my tribe first as a sign of trust, and then we get rid of
but I think other than that, like, we kind of talked about, like, the main Penner moments in these two episodes. It was basically that, and kind of saying, like, hey, the idol's found, people, who it's with. So maybe that was his play to avoid being sent back there again. Maybe he's like, I don't have it, stop sending me back to exile.
Please, there's nothing there. I mean, that is a really barren exile.
Yeah, that looks like a rough one.
Yeah. It's no sugar shack, that's for sure.
Candace. In one sense, Candace had the real kind of kick-ass challenge performance, and then she really just ruins it by going to that tribal council and making kissy faces at Adam the entire time.
Girl, this is on television.
Oh my God. And I'm really glad they captured it on camera, though, because it's so obnoxious and it's so bad. It is so funny.
It's so obnoxious and terrible, and honestly, it's important. Like, you see, like, oh, she's still feeling it.
Mm-hmm.
That's gonna matter. Like, as much as she says, like, I would be with Adam and Parvati, like, how much does she really care about her friendship with Parvati here?
I mean, unless there's more going on with Adam and Parvati and Candace than we know. There's no.
But and then speaking of Parvati, I think this is another more like what we expect when people talk about Cook Island's Parvati, where you just you don't see her that much. It's not as big of a pop as we got for like the JP boot. The biggest thing I noticed is that that's who Stephannie's talking to about, like, no, I do want to stay and stuff like that, which I thought was a little interesting. It's not the people I would have thought were connected.
Parvati does seem to kind of be at the center of that tribe in terms of the relationships. What's funny is I actually probably would have said that Jenny was the other person that's talking to everyone there too. But she was the backup boot for Christina, or at least it seemed that she was. She was maybe the decoy.
Right. Like, who knows how deeply they were ever really considering that, but... or how many people were, was it just Nate, who was the one who was like, maybe I'll, Christina's fine. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
really,
like
Nate's the one person who actually does seem to think that. So
yeah.
But and then Ozzy, he started off this episode, I'm never going to work with them. That's a betrayal. And then he's basically just like doing everything that he normally does.
Yeah, votes for Cowboy. Still doing well, except for when he's just completely outmatched weight-wise, which, what are you going to do? Yeah,
not going to do anything there.
At a certain point, you can be as strong as you want, and other people are just bigger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's
why wrestling has weight classes.
Yes, and you know that. Yeah, and you were not the wrestler in high school.
No. So, God, that would have been terrible. I would have probably had my own weight class, though, so I guess I would have won.
Actually, there is a weight where it's this weight and below.
Oh, no. What's that weight at? Do you know?
I think it's 103, but I think they've actually revised that down to 98 at some point.
Yeah, I would have been there for most of high school. I was really short back then too. Right. So I didn't hit 5 feet until sophomore year. Anyway, you can hear more about my height with my nightmares thread. Just kidding. Nobody
Yeah, you're
wants
promising a lot in these comments here. So, but we're not watching
We
alone.
took out Updog. This is what you get instead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is the loosey goosey rewatch podcast.
And he's banging down the door.
Yeah, he's like,
Stay on
please let me
topic.
talk about how bad Plan Voodoo is and how it's not important.
No, hear about my dreams.
Something else people might want to hear about is what the first time viewers were watching.
Hey.
Look at that transition.
What a segue. Is this a professional?
No, it is definitely not. I think they
No.
know that by now.
But you're still here, guys. Thanks for listening.
So what is your husband thinking?
Yes. Sorry, I was pulling out my notes.
Well, do you want me to go
this
first,
is for
then?
you. I started making notes. No, I got it. So one thing is he says that Parvati is flying under the radar, but doesn't contribute much. He says still, but then later, and I told you this later. I asked, like, I usually do this at the end of the season, but we were just kind of like chatting, and so this time I said I wasn't going to confirm or deny, but I'm like, oh, who do you think the returnees might be? So he surprised me when he said Parvati, Candace, Cowboy, and then most confusingly Flicka.
Okay.
But and so I was a little surprised. I was like, oh, why do you, there's, like, I told him, I was like, two of those are right, but wasn't saying who. And then he's like, oh, it's Parvati or Candace. And Candace, I was like, what makes you think that? And he's like, well, I've heard those names. Which for Parvati, I absolutely know is true, because first of all, he lives with me.
Right.
And of, there's a whole thing with a friend of mine, a long story. I've also, I've met Parvati, been excited about that. Candace, I'm honestly a little surprised and think he might be mixed up with someone else, because he does that, as we've heard. So that's a funny one, because that, I was like, so you remember Candace, but you don't remember me talking about Yule? Like, that, something's weird there. I'm a little suspicious. But so the fact that he thinks Cowboy and Flicka is very funny. I mean, you could kind of see.
I actually could totally see Cowboy. At this point, he's like the biggest character on this show.
But yeah, so that was funny. But yeah, and so that, because like then eventually it was like, oh, I guess Jenny, like I would just name everyone. It's like, I guess Jenny's flying on the radar too. Oh, I guess Rebecca is too. And so I was like, but why are you highlighting Parvati? And now I know.
Now you know, yeah.
And yeah, he still likes Yule. He thinks Yule and Becky are important. He can, like, said, he's like, he said it's way too early to try to name a final three, but Yule and Becky will be important in the season. But he doesn't care that much about Becky. He just likes Yule. And then I thought the part that was most interesting is he says, well, first, Penner didn't bother him as much this time as he did the last episode cycle. And he says that Ozzy's good, but like he's just never going to get that far, because he's such a threat. And said that based on the seasons he says that Ozzy is Rupert, not Tom, and he's not as charismatic as either.
That is partly right, partly. There's a lot to that.
It's interesting. The thing about Ozzy and Cook Islands is the mutiny saves his entire game.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Definitely.
And we'll get there. But yeah, so that I think, obviously we haven't hit that yet, so he doesn't know that. It has not seen him perform in a single individual challenge, which will become crucial to young Oscar's legacy.
But I think you can still see that he'd be very good in a lot of these individual challenges. I mean, well, at least the person I'm watching with believes that, though of course she's seen fewer seasons, so she doesn't know that someone who's very good in challenges is also very frequently a target. But she thinks that Ozzy's going very far. Yule is her winner pick. She seems to be kind of going back and forth between the two of them, which is very appropriate, in fact.
Interesting. Wow. She's got good reads.
She does. I tried to nail her down. So nail her down. That's it. I did. I said down.
Sorry, I don't care.
Okay.
Funny. I'm mean.
in the past couple weeks, whenever I bring up like, so what do you think? Or like, who do you like and all that, she's been kind of like taking kind of a very kind of bird's eye, like, oh, this is someone who I think will do well. And I'm like, and so this week I'm like, no. I want to know who you actually like. Like, who are you rooting for? And she's like, oh, Yule. And I was like, yeah, okay, yeah. I'm like, should have seen that one coming. But then she admitted that she actually had grown to really like Cowboy by the end of the second episode, which she did not last week, as I mentioned. And she was actually kind of sad and a little surprised to see him go. I think she thought that he'd be sticking around for longer. And so she was like, so why do you think they voted him out? And I'm like, well, let's like talk through it. And she's like, well, if his plan worked, then, then they might know that Yule has the idol. And I'm like, yup. And she's like, oh, you think that's why Yule? And I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's why Yule did it. She's like,
oh. Very good.
So
yeah, she's picking up fast.
Yeah. And so what else does she have to say? She was really impressed by Candace early in the second episode, and then was very disgusted by her at the end of it. She was like, no, what are you doing?
I would pay money to have been able to go back in time, be at while they're watching, and be able to read John Cody's mind.
Yes. I think there was probably some serious doubt about that relationship at that point, but
which probably was still, had to be in the early stages too.
Like I mean, couldn't have been more than like 9 months at most.
Yeah,
at most.
And look at them now.
Yeah, and look at them now.
3 kids. Congratulations, yeah. Cody family, on your third child.
Now she did bring up. I kind of started asking her about some people on the other tribe. But before I did, she was like, everyone seems to like Parvati. And I'm like, oh. And I'm like, why do you think that is? She's like, it might just be because she's, young and pretty. And I'm like, it might be. But, do you think there's anything more to that? She's like, I don't know. But her name never comes up as a boot. And, I don't know if she's doing something well or if it's just, she's just very good looking. And I'm like, okay, that's fair. Again, try not to spoil anything here. I think I think I brought up, I was like, Nate came up and I was like, well, Nate's name doesn't seem to come up either. And she's like, yeah, but I don't think that's because he's young and pretty. And I'm like, fair, totally fair.
Wow, burn on Nate.
No, I mean, it wasn't like he's not a good looking guy.
I know. I'm just kidding. I mean, all of the men who were originally on that tribe are obviously like objectively good looking, even though Adam, I could never see that face as attractive. It just does nothing for me. I want to punch it.
Right.
But it would dent my hand. I'm so weak.
Right. She also mentioned Brad on that tribe as someone who like kind of seemed to be, both like in the middle and like, no one perceives him on that tribe as like a threat. He seems to be like in the mix. Everyone kind of likes him. Won't work out for him. That's kind of actually a sudden fall. I guess we'll talk about that next week.
Yeah, we will find out next week.
Yeah. But yeah, also not really taken to Penner so far. I have slipped up and called him Penner a few times. It is impossible not to.
I think I've leaned in. I've tried to, because I mentioned the Seinfeld clip and stuff like that. So I've kind of leaned into like that being why he's like a figure, oh yeah, he did this and he had the vibe. I mean, he has an Oscar, right. Just like, that. And like, of course he would think like, that's why I pay more attention to him too, being passionate about such an industry, but yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, but so far, she doesn't really like him. I don't think she dislikes him, but she doesn't like him. But yeah, the big surprise this week in her thoughts was that she liked Cowboy. She was like, when Cowboy went, she's like, oh, I'm kind of sad to see him go. Like, she said that he's a real find. That's what she said about him in terms of
she's not wrong.
I was like, you are not wrong about that. That is.
Especially because I'm pretty sure most of this cast is recruited. So like that, he was a find, I'm sure. So,
yeah.
Props to whichever casting assistant spotted him.
Yeah. So, that's most of her thoughts. She was surprised they were able to go to the other island. Yeah, but everything else is pretty straightforward, pretty much. So
Yeah. Oh, I can't wait for the mutiny.
yeah. So
I'm so excited.
yeah. Well, and good news. We're watching another 2 episodes next week, but not
Yes.
episode 7. We're obviously skipping the recap.
Yes, good reminder, everyone. We are not doing episode 7 because, like, you can watch it if you want, but like, we're not going to talk about it.
No, yeah. So instead we'll be going right to 8 and 9. And so, we'll see some excitement next week. Anything
Yeah.
else to add before we wrap this thing up?
No. Oh, I guess does that include the plugs, or is that the wrapping up?
Just give the plugs. Yeah, sure. If you don't
Okay.
have anything
I'm
else.
sorry.
No, it's okay. I wasn't asking for them, but but if you didn't have anything else, I figure sure, let's just give the
Well,
plugs.
then I was worried. I like said no, and then you're like, okay, well, I guess I'll read the website.
I'm never gonna. Oh, come on! I'm too
I've
lazy to
had a
do
very
that.
long day, people. I'm sorry. I was like rushing around before this was recording, like, I just finished working. Now I have to eat. Now I have to record. I'm so tired.
Yeah.
Anyway, you can obviously listen to this podcast wherever you find podcasts. You figured it out this far. I feel like you can figure that rest on your own. The website where you can read the comments and see occasional other content we sometimes post every now and then at
Not much these days, but
at purplerockpodcast.com. The show's Twitter is at purplerockpod. My Twitter is at purplerockemma, and that's what matters most. But if you feel like it, you can follow at purplerockmatt, and definitely don't follow at purplerockandy.
yeah.
The others don't exist. It's fine.
It's true. Let's hit that theme music.